All right, kiddos, we have been working on context clues and we have been studying American colonists. So the origins of the country that you and I know today in terms of the government and traditions. So we're going to continue that conversation by looking at some more information on American colonies. Today, I have a feeling there's going to be quite a few giggles and laughs because we are going to look at all of the gross things about being an American colonist. So the fact that, like we talked yesterday about how they didn't have a shower on the Mayflower and it was 2 months with no shower, we're going to learn more little gross facts like that about what life was like if you were a colonist coming over from Europe, okay? Lots of interesting information here. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we have some background knowledge and some background information on the colonists. So I would like for us to review our vocabulary that we started earlier in the week. So we're going to go through each of these words 2 times, and I want to see motions happening with them as well. So remember, colonies are, did I share my sound? Hold on. I did. Hey.
Colonies are small communities and towns that people made.
Let's try it one more time.
Colonies are small communities and towns that people made.
Awesome. Okay, so colonies are those small towns that came over and people had to create. There wasn't a neighborhood to move into. There weren't buildings they could make better. It was nothing, just forest, and they had to make a community. We call that establishing.
Establish means to create, build, and make permanent.
So when we establish a community, we've got to create it, build it, and make sure it's going to last and stay permanent.
Establish means to create, build, and make permanent.
I like the zoom in on the guns that I'm getting from some of y'all. All right, founders, that is another word for people who came over and started the colonies.
Founders are people who started something first.
So remember,
founders are people who started something first.
Very good. We also can call those colonists. Some of the colonists were the founders.
Colonists were the people who made the colonies.
All right.
Colonists were the people who made the colonies.
Very good. Settlers is another word for colonists. So anytime you hear founders, colonists, settlers, those can all be referring to the same person or people.
Settlers were the people who moved to new land and lived there.
Awesome. So they didn't just come and go. It wasn't a vacation. They lived there.
Settlers were the people who moved to new land and lived there.
Awesome. So we've talked about how settlers were also immigrants. They moved to a new land and intended to stay for a long time. So the colonists, the settlers, the founders were also immigrants. That is our vocabulary that I wanted to make sure you remembered. So now that we've got that fresh in our mind, we're going to watch a brain pop video about the 13 colonies. We've learned about the first colony that was established inside of Virginia, but there were actually 13 of them. So as you're learning about the 13 colonies, just keep in mind, you're going to be learning some pretty gross things about what went on here too. All right, here we go. Listen and think.
Today we're learning about the 13 colonies. A colony is an area settled by a group of people outside their country. Who established colonies in North America? European explorers first started sailing to North America around the year 1000. About 500 years later, Christopher Columbus landed in the New World. Soon, People from England, Spain, France, and other countries began making claims to the land and settling in North America. People were already living in the area, and many were killed by settlers. Others died of diseases that were spread from the settlers. Still others were forced into slavery or forced to move off their land. One of the earliest settlements was established by the Spanish in 1565 in St. Augustine, which is now part of Florida. In 1607, English settlers founded Jamestown, which is now part of Virginia. The settlers had moved there to gain more land and wealth and have a better life. In 1620, the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, which is now part of Massachusetts. They'd moved because they wanted freedom to practice their own religion. Over the next 100 years, European settlers founded colonies all around the east coast of North America. What were the 13 colonies? The 13 colonies were English territories established during the 1600s and early 1700s. They were Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The 13 colonies were ruled by the King of Great Britain. The colonists kept ties to England, but adapted to a new way of life. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island were the New England colonies. New England colonists grew crops and fished to feed their families and use for trade. Many New England merchants brought goods over from England to trade with other colonists, so ports around New England became busy centers of trade. The meeting house was the focus of many New England communities, and it was used for business, religious services, and town meetings. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware were the middle colonies. Many colonists farmed wheat and other grains and traded with people all over the colonies. In fact, the middle colonies were known as the bread colonies. People in the middle colonies also built factories to produce iron, paper, and also textiles or cloth. Many people in the middle colonies came from different European countries and practiced different religions. So the culture of the middle colonies included a mix of different traditions. Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia were the southern colonies. The soil in the southern colonies was good for farming, and many colonists ran plantations. They grew crops like sugarcane, rice, cotton, and tobacco. African slaves were brought over in the early 1600s, and plantations relied heavily on them. In the 1700s, African slaves made up almost half the population of the southern colonies. Slavery wasn't abolished until 1865, well after the United States of America was established. How did the colonies become the United States of America? The colonists had to pay taxes to the British government, and they did not get to choose their leaders. The colonists decided to separate from Great Britain and establish their own independent government. In 1775, fighting broke out between the colonists and British soldiers, and the American Revolution began. The war finally ended in 1781. Later, in 1787, the Constitution of the United States was written and signed. The 13 colonies became the first 13 states of the United States of America. Where are you going, Moby? You're going to start a new colony.
Alrighty. Reactions or thoughts to anything that you just saw or learned or wanted to discuss? Did anyone see anything they wanted to talk about? There's about 200 years of information shoved into that video, so I know that was a lot. Any reactions? Okay. There are a lot of things mentioned in there that we are going to talk about in more detail as time progresses, but that is an overall picture of what's going on in the historical time period that we are talking about. Okay. All right, you have been released an activity on Mayan that we are getting ready to work on. Before we work on it, you are going to be reading the story that I told you about on Mayan about gross facts, okay? We're working on context clues still, and now we're going to be reading this text, Gross Facts About the American Colonies. You're going to read this book on Mayan, and it's in the projects section, okay? The project on Mayan is called Establishing Communities. So just like you've gone to your projects section to get books on Native Americans or on our Thanksgiving texts and our immigration texts, you're going to do the same thing for establishing communities. So on Mayan, you will go to projects, and there is a folder called Establishing Community. Okay, go ahead and open up on Mayan that book, Establishing Community. All righty, welcome back. How many of you feel like you want to go take a shower now? I do. It's gross. All right, so you have learned about the life of the colonists. Some of you yesterday told me that you wouldn't survive the Mayflower because of the lack of food and the lack of space. And I think a lot more of you are telling me you wouldn't survive now because you don't want to use corn on the cob as toilet paper, right? I got a thumbs up from Aiden. No, I do not. Okay, good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today you are going to use that information to put context into what life was like for the Pilgrims. So what that means is you are going to determine if a gross fact was about a certain category or another. So Mr. McKinney is going to put some context or some background information about the Pilgrims' food and hygiene. You are going to be sorting between their sicknesses and their, I think, activities. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we'll look at it. So this is what you are going to think about when you are sorting your activity today.
Today we are going to be talking about context clues. And I want you to try to figure out the meaning of these unknown words and split them up into two different categories. Does each word talk about food or hygiene? Hygiene is just your overall health, how well you take care of yourself, how well you brush your teeth, wash your hands, and things like that. So let's look at the first word, knits. I'm not sure if knits should belong to food or hygiene. Maybe you remember, but it's also okay to go back in the story to find even greater context. Here's the page where it talks about knits. It is on page 24. Here's what it says. Most colonists had dirty hands, muddy feet, and greasy hair. Itchy lice and nits lived in their hair. So nits must mean something similar to lice. So that tells me it has to do with your hygiene. It is not a food. Rarely bathed. Do you think this would be in the context of food or hygiene? Hygiene would be correct. Smelled bad. Now this could go either way because food can smell bad, but if we read the context in the story, it's actually talking about people smelled bad. So that would be their hygiene. Now this is a very interesting one, and so is this. two words are chamber pots and outhouse. On this page, it talks about outhouses. The title of the page says bathrooms. It says an outhouse seat was a board with a hole in the middle. Waste fell into it. Yuck. And down here, it gives the definition of an outhouse, and it says that it serves as a beautiful, wonderful toilet. And then on this page, it says that when an outhouse was difficult to get to, for instance, if it was really cold out or if it was storming outside, they would use a chamber pot. And it says it was dumped out each day. So it must have been a bowl used to go to the bathroom in. Aren't we so thankful that we have indoor bathrooms? So which category do you think chamber pots and outhouse belongs to? I hope chamber pots would not be a food.
Blah.
Do not mistake it as that. They are both hygiene. Wow, we are all on hygiene. We have 0 food so far. Let's see what the next one is. Hardtack. What is hardtack? Well, if we look on page 10, it says, colonists' only bread was hardtack, a rock-hard cracker. There's also a picture of it right here. So hardtack must mean food. Rotten, in the context of the story, it talked about rotten food. Moldy would talk about food. Dried fruit. Do you think dried fruit would be talked about in the context of food or hygiene?
Food.
Food would be correct. Vegetables. Do you think vegetables would be in the context of food or hygiene?
Food.
Food. And let's say you don't know what that word says. You come along that word and you're not sure how to pronounce it. Well, if the context of the page is talking about food, then this must mean a type of food. And last but not least, dirty hands. Do you think dirty hands would be talked about in the context of food or hygiene?
Hygiene.
Hygiene is correct.
All right, so this is what you are going to do today inside of your activity. And Aiden G reminded me that you are going to be sorting the words into the context of shelters or sickness, okay? So here is a quick directional video.
Determine if each word belongs in the context of sickness or in the context of shelter.
So you are going to look at these words and phrases and use your text to figure out if this is describing a sickness, achoo, or a shelter that they would use to keep themselves safe from the weather and the like. So you'll look at each word and decide, is this a sickness or does this belong in shelter? On slides 2 and 3 are questions or responses for you to answer. You need to answer them in complete sentences, okay? Complete sentences. If you're struggling to read it, you can listen to the video.
Share one thing you think would be the most difficult about being a colonist.
There you go. And you can then type or record your voice speaking in complete sentences, okay, on 2 and 3. What questions can I answer about your assignment expectation? Any questions about your assignment expectation right now? Okay, lovely. Let me see. Trying to stop share. There we go. Before you log off, we're going to talk about what you should be completing, and that is this seesaw activity. When you get done with this seesaw activity, if you have extra time, I would recommend you read some more books from the projects that have been related to our topic on Mayan. You can also spend some time on Lexia.